My name is James Okafor, and my brother looked me in the eye and told me a restaurant was above my level. Not quietly, not privately, in front of his wife, his friends, his colleagues. 7 people at a table outside a restaurant I had suggested for a family birthday dinner. He said it with a laugh that was supposed to make it sound like a joke. It was not a joke. James, come on, look at this place. This is above your level, man. Let's go somewhere you can actually afford. Everyone at the table heard it. His wife smiled the smile of someone who is used to this. His friends said nothing. I stood on the sidewalk and I felt something I had felt 100 times in my life. The specific humiliation of being reduced, in public, by someone who should have known better. What nobody at that table knew, what my brother David had absolutely no idea about, was that I owned the building they were standing in front of. Not just the restaurant. The entire building. Before I tell you how that moment played out, take a second to like and subscribe, but only if stories about people who were underestimated by the people closest to them and then became completely undeniable mean something to you. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because the building is only part of the story. I grew up in a family with 2 Speeds. David's Speed and everyone else's. David was 4 years older than me. The firstborn. The one who arrived when my parents were young enough to still be excited by everything and had the specific energy of people who had not yet been worn down by the work of raising children. He received their full attention in the way that firstborns sometimes do, not because they are loved more, but because they are loved first, before the parents have learned to divide themselves. By the time I arrived, my parents were managing, not struggling, managing. My father worked in telecommunications, a mid-level technical role that paid reliably and grew slowly. My mother worked at a school district administrative office. Together they made a life that was stable and careful and left very little margin for extras. David had gotten the extras. Not because of unfairness, because of timing. The early years when the family had a little more breathing room and a little more energy for indulgence. I got the later years, which meant I got the hand-me-down bikes and the abbreviated birthday parties and the college conversation that went, "We'll help as much as we can, but you'll need to find your own way mostly." David had a full ride. My parents had put money away for it specifically. I had myself. This is not a complaint. I want to be clear about that. My parents did what they could, and they were honest about the constraints. My father sat with me when I was 17 and said, "James, we can give you some." Not what we gave David. I'm sorry about that. But you're resourceful. You always have been. Resourceful, that word. I have thought about it for 20 years. About whether it was a compliment or an instruction. I decided it was both. David had taken his full ride and done something reasonable with it. Business degree, mid-level management at a logistics company. He made good money, not great money, but good. He drove a nice car, lived in a nice house in a nice suburb, and had developed over the years a particular way of carrying himself that suggested he believed these things were evidence of who he was rather than what he had. He also had, for as long as I could remember, a way of looking at me that contained a ceiling. Not stated, contained. It was in the way he talked about my jobs, the sequence of them in my 20s, each one a step that he described as interesting in the tone you use for things that are less than you expected. It was in the way he gave advice I hadn't asked for. It was in the way he introduced me at gatherings. "This is my younger brother James, he's in. What are you doing now, James? Always, what are you doing now?" As though whatever I was doing now was probably a temporary situation on the way to something he could respect. I worked in real estate in my 20s, not developing, not investing, working. Property management for a mid-sized company that handled commercial and residential units across 3 counties. I was good at it. I understood buildings, not as physical structures, but as financial instruments, as community anchors, as assets with a personality that you could read if you paid attention. I watched the people who owned what I managed. I watched what they did, how they thought, what they looked for when they acquired, what they prioritized when they operated. I was taking notes in the margins of every interaction for 8 years. I was not telling my family any of this, not because it was secret, because talking to David about my plans required hearing his assessment of my plans, and his assessment was always delivered with the ceiling built in. The ceiling was made of specific material. It was made of every moment he had said something that put me below him. There was the Thanksgiving when I was 26, working in property management, when he asked me in front of the extended family how the building maintenance thing was going. Not property management, building maintenance, like I was changing light bulbs. There was the birthday dinner for our mother when I was 28, when I mentioned I had been looking into a small real estate investment, and David had said, with the patient tone of someone explaining something to a child, James, real estate investing requires capital. It's not really a starter field. Maybe get a few more years under your belt first. I had been in real estate for 6 years. There was the Christmas when I was 30, when I mentioned I was working with a partner on a deal, and David said, just be careful with those partnership situations. They usually end badly when both people are still figuring things out. His wife had smiled the smile. His friends had moved on to other topics. I had smiled and said nothing, and filed the moment in the same place I filed all the others. In the drawer where I kept the material, not for revenge, for fuel. My partner's name was Delia Santos. She was 32 when we met, a commercial real estate attorney who had left a large firm to start her own practice focused on small and mid-sized development transactions. She had the specific combination of legal precision and deal instinct that made her rare in a field where most people had one or the other. We met at a property walkthrough. She was representing a buyer. I was representing the property management company on behalf of the seller. We disagreed about a lease provision for 45 minutes, and at the end of it she said, "You're good at this." "So are you," I said. We became professional partners before we became anything else. Our first deal together was a small commercial property, 3 units, underperforming, priced correctly for what it was and what it could be with the right management. We pooled what we had, structured the acquisition carefully, brought in the right tenants, and 18 months later sold it for a return that was modest but real. We used the return for the next one, and the next. This is what building actually looks like. Not a single dramatic moment. Not an overnight transformation. A sequence of careful, well-researched, patiently executed decisions, each one a little larger than the one before, each one generating the credibility and the capital for the next step. We did not talk about it broadly. This was partly strategy. We had learned in the first few deals that discussing acquisitions before they were complete created noise that was unhelpful. And it was partly something more personal. I had spent years having my plans assessed by people who put a ceiling on them. I had decided that I was going to build in the quiet until the building was so visible that no ceiling could contain it. By year 4 of our partnership, we had 7 properties in the portfolio. By year 6, 14. By the time I was 38 years old, Okafor Santos Properties had a portfolio valued in excess of 8 figures. Not liquid assets, but real, documented, generating, growing. And I had not told my family, not because I was hiding, because I was building. Because there is a version of this where you announce too early and spend the next 5 years managing other people's expectations and access instead of building the thing. I had chosen to build the thing. The restaurant was called Meridian. It was on the ground floor of a 6-story mixed-use building in the city's emerging arts district, a neighborhood that had been 5 years earlier the kind of neighborhood people described as up-and-coming, and that was now unambiguously arrived. The building had 11 commercial units on the lower floors and 22 residential units above. Delia and I had acquired it 3 years earlier. It had been a distressed asset, a building with structural problems that had been deferred, and a tenant situation that had been mismanaged. We bought it at a price that reflected both of those things. We put 18 months into the remediation and the repositioning. We curated the tenant mix carefully. Meridian was one of those tenants. A chef named Kwame Asante had approached us through a mutual contact. He wanted to open his first solo restaurant after years of working in other people's kitchens. He had a vision, a following, and a concept that was exactly right for the building and the neighborhood. We structured the lease as a partnership, below market rent in the early years, in exchange for an equity stake in the restaurant entity. It had been, by every measure, one of the best decisions we made. Meridian had become something. Not just a good restaurant, a destination. Written up in every relevant publication. On the list of the city's best tables for 2 consecutive years. The kind of place that had a 6-week wait for a Saturday reservation and where the bar became its own experience for people who couldn't get a table. I ate there regularly. Not because I needed to perform ownership, because Kwame was a friend, and the food was extraordinary, and the building was mine, and I had an open invitation that I used quietly, and with no announcement. The family birthday dinner was my mother's 62nd. She had mentioned Meridian specifically. She had read about it somewhere, and said to me on the phone, "James, I would love to try that restaurant everyone's talking about. You know, the one in the Arts District." "I know it," I said. "I'll get us in." "Do you think you can?" she said. "I heard it's impossible to get a reservation." "I'll figure it out," I said. I texted Kwame. He texted back. "Table, for how many? What time?" I organized the dinner. I arranged the reservation. I told my family the plan. And on the evening of my mother's birthday, David stood on the sidewalk in front of the most beautiful building I had ever acquired and looked at me with the ceiling in his eyes and said, "This is above your level, man." I stood on that sidewalk. The evening was warm. The building's facade was lit well. We had invested in exterior lighting that made the stone facade glow amber at night. The restaurant windows were full of candlelight and the movement of a full house. 7 people were looking at me. My mother, my aunt, David, his wife Christine. 3 of David's colleagues who had come along for the celebration. I had 2 choices in that moment. I could say nothing, absorb it, file it in the drawer, or I could let them know. What made the decision for me was my mother's face. She had heard what David said. She was looking at me with an expression that mixed embarrassment on my behalf with the particular helplessness of a mother who has watched this dynamic for 30 years and never found the words to stop it. That expression was what made me decide. Not anger. Love for my mother. She deserved better than to have her birthday dinner started this way. And I was tired of the drawer. "David," I said. He was already turning toward the group, ready to redirect everyone to the restaurant he preferred. "David," I said again. He turned back. "I need to tell you something," I said. "About this building." Something in my tone made him stop. "What about it?" he said. I looked at the facade, the amber glow, the lit windows on 6 floors. I looked back at my brother. "I own it," I said. The sidewalk went very quiet. "What?" he said. "The building," I said. "All of it. The restaurant, the commercial units, the residential floors. My company acquired it 3 years ago. We did an 18-month renovation and repositioning. Kwame, the chef, who I know personally, is a tenant and a partner." I paused. "So when you say Meridian is above my level, you're technically referring to my own building." Nobody said anything for a long moment. David was doing something with his face that I had never seen it do before. "You," he started. "Also," I said, "I have a table reserved. Inside. At my building. For Mom's birthday." I turned to my mother. "Should we go in?" She was staring at me. Not with shock, exactly. With something more complex than shock. Like someone watching a picture come into focus that they've been squinting at for years. "James," she said. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said. "Let's eat. I want to tell you about the dinner, because the dinner is where everything was." We walked in. Kwame came out immediately. He knew we were coming. He always did. And he greeted me with the warmth of a friend and a business partner, and the specific ease of 2 people who, have been through something real together. James, he said. Welcome. Mrs. Okafor, happy birthday. Your table is ready. He led us through the restaurant. I had been here dozens of times, but I watched David watch the room. He was doing the recalibration in real time. I could see it. The way his eyes moved from the quality of the space to the clientele to the way the staff responded to our arrival. The pieces assembling into a picture he hadn't had before. We sat at the corner table. The best one. The one with the view of both the room and the window that looked onto the lit street. Kwame brought a bottle of champagne. For the birthday, he said. He looked at my mother. And for the occasion. We ordered. The first course came. David was quiet in a way he had never been quiet. His wife Christine was also quiet. But differently, she had the expression of someone who had suspected something for a long time and was now watching the suspicion confirmed. His colleagues, to their credit, seemed genuinely interested in the evening rather than the drama. Two of them asked good questions about the building, about real estate development, about how we had found the property. I answered them. My mother sat at the head of the table and she watched me answer them, and her face was doing something I needed to look away from slightly because it was too full. About 40 minutes into the dinner, David said something. How long? He said. I looked at him. How long what? How long have you been doing this? He said. The real estate. The portfolio. All of it. 6 years with Delia, I said. 8 years building up to that. 14 years, he said. Yes. He was quiet again. Why didn't you say anything? He said. I looked at my brother. This was the question. The real one. You know why, David, I said. He looked at the table. James, every time I mentioned something I was working on, I said, you told me to be careful, to get more experience, to manage my expectations. Every time I had a plan, the conversation became about the ceiling you'd put on it. I paused. You asked me at Thanksgiving what year I was 26, what the building maintenance thing was like. Christine looked at her husband. That's not. He started. You told me real estate investing wasn't a starter field, I said. That was 8 years ago. I had been working in real estate for 6 years at that point. David's jaw was tight. I was trying to protect you, he said. I know, I said, and I meant it. I believe he believed that. I know you thought you were protecting me, but what you were actually doing was making it impossible for me to share what I was building with you. Because every time I shared it, you found the ceiling. The table was very quiet. My mother put down her fork. I didn't know either, she said quietly. You never told me about the properties. I know, Mom, I said. I was going to. Soon. Tonight seemed like a good moment. I paused. Or a moment got created. David made a sound that was almost a laugh and wasn't. He looked at me for a long moment. I said that on the sidewalk, he said. Yes, I said. In front of everyone. Yes. He put his hands on the table, flat, like he was steadying himself. I'm sorry, he said. Not the reflexive kind. The kind that comes after someone has had 20 seconds to understand the full dimensions of what they've done. I'm sorry for tonight, he said. And I'm sorry for... He stopped. For the building maintenance thing. Christine touched his arm. He looked at me. You built something, he said. A real thing. And I spent 15 years assuming you were one step behind me. He shook his head. I was wrong. I looked at my brother. I had rehearsed nothing. I had not planned this conversation. I had no script for this moment. I know you're proud, I said. I know you think a lot of what you have. And I understand why. You worked for it, and it's real. I paused. But somewhere along the way, you decided that your ceiling was my ceiling. And it wasn't, David. It was never mine. He was quiet. I'm sorry, he said again. I know, I said. We ate our dinner. The food was extraordinary, as it always was. My mother had the sea bass, and she closed her eyes after the first bite in the way she closed her eyes when something was exactly right. By the time the dessert came, Kwame had made something special for my mother's birthday. A small cake with a candle that the table sang around. The temperature of the evening had changed, not into pretending nothing had happened, into something more honest than before. I want to tell you what happened after the dinner, because this is the part that matters most. We walked out onto the sidewalk. The same sidewalk where we'd arrived. David stopped beside me. His colleagues had moved slightly ahead, giving us space the way people do when they sense a conversation needs privacy. "I want to understand what you've built," he said. Not for any reason except I want to understand." He looked at the building. "Can you tell me about it?" I told him. "Not everything, but the shape of it, the acquisition, the remediation, the repositioning, Kwame and the restaurant, what it had been and what it was now." David listened differently than he had ever listened to me. Without the ceiling, just listening. "The portfolio," he said when I finished. "How large?" 14 properties currently, I said. Various stages, commercial and mixed use primarily. He was quiet for a moment. "James," he said. "Yeah?" "You're better at this than I ever gave you credit for." "I know," I said. He looked at me. "How are you not angrier?" he said. "I am angry," I said. "A little. Not about tonight specifically. About 15 years of feeling like you couldn't see me." I paused. "But anger is a bad business partner. It makes you make decisions for the wrong reasons." I looked at the building. I made most of my decisions for the right reasons. Because I understood the asset. Because the numbers worked. Because I believed in what I was building. I turned back to him. The anger was in the room, but it wasn't driving. He nodded slowly. "You sound like someone who figured something out," he said. "I figured several things out," I said. "One of them is that proving something to someone who put a ceiling on you is satisfying for about 30 seconds. After that, it's just your life. You still have to live it." My mother came and stood between us. She put one hand on each of our arms. She looked at the building for a moment. "My younger son owns this," she said. She said it quietly, almost to herself. "Yes," I said. "I wish your father could see it," she said. My father had died 4 years earlier. A quiet man who had worked steadily and provided reliably and loved both of us in the precise, understated way of someone who expressed love through showing up. "He knew," I said, "or he knew something. He told me I was resourceful." My mother smiled. "He always said that," she said. "Every time someone asked about you. James is resourceful." Like that was the whole answer. She squeezed my arm. I think he was right. We stood on the sidewalk in front of my building for another few minutes. And then my mother said, "Now I'm going to call a car because my feet are killing me. But before I do, I want to say one thing." We both looked at her. "David," she said, "you owe your brother a very expensive birthday dinner." David made the sound that was almost a laugh, and this time became one. "Yes," he said, "I think I do. Things didn't transform overnight. I want to be honest about that, because honest is more useful than tidy." David and I had a long conversation 3 weeks after the birthday dinner. Just the two of us. He came to my office, a real office now, in a building we also owned, a detail I mentioned without drama, and we talked for 2 hours. He said things he should have said years earlier. I said things I had been carrying for years. Neither of us performed. Neither of us pretended. He said, "I think I needed you to be below me. I think that was something I needed, and I'm not proud of it." That was the most honest thing he had ever said to me. "Why?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Because they put everything into my education," he said. "And I've always felt like I had to be worth it, like I had to be the success story." He looked at his hands. "If you were doing as well as me, it meant, I don't know, that I wasn't as special." I looked at my brother. "You are," I said, "and so am I." "Those aren't the same statement." He nodded. "I know that now," he said. "You knew it before," I said. "You just forgot." He almost smiled. "I want to understand what you're doing," he said. "The business. Not to get anything out of it. I just want to know what my brother built." So I showed him. Over the following months, I brought David into the work. Not as a partner. The business was mine and Delia's, and that structure was right for reasons that had nothing to do with family. But as someone I was willing to share it with. A site walk through here. a deal review conversation there. The kind of access you give someone when you decide to stop managing the distance between you. He was better at receiving than I expected. He asked good questions. He didn't put the ceiling back up. He had, in the 30 seconds of real embarrassment on that sidewalk, had something cracked open that he had the sense not to close again. Christine told me, at a family dinner a few months later, that he had talked about the birthday dinner more than once, not proudly, regretfully. That he had said, more than once, that he had spent 20 years being wrong about his brother. That meant something. Delia met David at a deal review I invited him to sit in on. She shook his hand, and then she looked at me and said, quietly, "He looks like you." "We get that sometimes," I said. "Is this the one from the sidewalk?" she said. "Yes," I said. She looked at him again. "He seems humbled," she said. "He is," I said. "For now." She smiled. "Good enough," she said. "The portfolio now has 21 properties. I tell you this not as a boast, as a context. Because the number is not the point. The number is the result of a series of decisions made over 14 years by two people who understood what they were doing and were willing to do the unglamorous work of doing it correctly. The point is what you build when nobody is watching. The point is what happens when you stop waiting for someone else to see your potential and start actualizing it in the quiet. I had a lunch with Kwame last spring. We sat at the corner table, our table, the one we'd had my mother's birthday dinner at, and we talked about the restaurant, about the building, about what was next. At one point he said, "You know what I think about that building when I first leased the space?" "What?" I said. "I thought, the owner gets it," he said. "Most landlords, you walk in and they see a unit and a rent check. You walked in and you saw a restaurant before there was one. You saw what this block was going to become before it became it." He shook his head. "That's not common." "It's just paying attention," I said. "It's paying attention and believing what you see," he said. "Most people don't do both." I thought about that. About the 14 years of paying attention and believing what I saw. About the family dinners where I said nothing, because saying something meant hearing the ceiling. About the sidewalk and the amber glow and my brother's face when he understood what he was standing in front of. About what it costs to build in the quiet, and what it's worth when the building is undeniable. I want to leave you with something. Not a lesson exactly. More like a question. Who in your life has put a ceiling on you? Not a stranger. Not someone whose opinion you don't care about. The person whose assessment of you matters, and has always mattered, and who has used that mattering to install a limit on what you reach for. A parent, a sibling, a friend, a mentor who became a constraint. Someone who every time you shared a plan found the reason it probably wouldn't work. Who described your ambitions with that particular tone that sounds like concern but operates like a lid. Who asked, "Are you sure?" in a way that meant I don't think you should. I want to ask you something about that person. Have you stopped sharing your plans with them? Because maybe you should. Not forever, not as punishment. But there is a phase of building, and every person who has ever built something knows this phase, where the thing is real enough to you, and fragile enough in the world that the wrong voice at the wrong moment can do real damage. Where someone else's doubt, if you let it in, becomes your own. Where the ceiling someone puts on you becomes the ceiling you accept. In that phase, the right move is to build in the quiet. Not to hide. Not to be secretive. To protect the work. To let what you're making get strong enough to stand up to scrutiny before you invite scrutiny in. And then, when it's ready, when the building is real and lit up and standing on the block for anyone to see, you walk out there, and you let it speak. The moment on that sidewalk was not my plan, but it was also not an accident. It was the result of 14 years of building in the quiet, paying attention to what I saw, trusting what I understood, and refusing to install someone else's ceiling as my own. I didn't build the portfolio to prove anything to David. I built it because I saw the opportunity and I had the discipline to pursue it, And I had a partner who was as rigorous and as committed as I was. David's reaction was a consequence, not the goal. The goal was always the building. If you take one thing from this story, take that distinction. Build because the thing is worth building. Build because you understand it and it's real and it matters. Build because the work is the work and the work is yours. And if the building happens to be visible from a sidewalk where someone once told you it was above your level, well, that's just geography. My name is James Okafor. My brother said a restaurant was above my level. I own the building it's in. I own 14 other buildings, and I built all of them in the quiet, while people who put ceilings on me assumed the ceiling was holding. It wasn't holding. It never was. It was just something I walked under on the way to something larger. You have ceilings in your life too. Some of them were installed by people who love you. Some by people who were afraid of what you might become. Some you installed yourself from things you absorbed so long ago you forgot they were installed. Examine them. Test them. Find out which ones are actually load-bearing and which ones are just in the way. And then build, in the quiet, until the building is so undeniable that no ceiling can contain it. That's the whole thing. That's always been the whole thing.